About the registrants?
So perhaps I'll just start by welcoming everyone. Thank you so much for joining our event to celebrate Donald Moss's new book, Psychoanalysis in a Plague Year. I'm Hannah Zevan. I'm the founding editor of Parapraxis magazine and the founder and co-director with Alex Colston, who's also here today, of the Psychosocial Foundation. And we're hosted by these two new groups, Parapraxis, which is a new popular magazine of psychoanalysis and the psychosocial on the left, and the Psychosocial Foundation, which publishes it, a nonprofit educational organization that exists to advance our understandings of where the political, the social, and the psychological might converge. I'm going to turn things over to our panelists momentarily, but first I want to welcome you all and to let you know about some upcoming events at the foundation as everyone still is joining the link. So firstly, here is our website where you might find information about all of our events. We have some great ones coming later in the month and next month. On October 30th, we are hosting a roundtable on psychoanalysis in the Chinese diaspora, co-hosted by Nancy Da and Amy Wong, and many others. And if you want to register for that, you can follow this link. As always, all of our events are sliding scale. And on November 12th, we'll have Francisco Gonzalez, Camille Robsy, and Anki Mukherjee to talk about the clinic as a psychosocial keyword. And you can register for this here. This fall is going to be an exciting time at the Psychosocial Foundation. In just a few weeks, we're going to launch the website for Parapraxis, which will be publishing original web-only content, and we'll also start taking subscriptions for our print magazine, which will appear this winter. Also this winter at the foundation, we'll be offering short courses and a new certificate program in psychosocial studies. So you can always sign up for our mailing list, which is at the bottom of that website link. And we promise to send you just one monthly email and never spam. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter at our handle there. So with that out of the way, thank you so much for joining, and to our three brilliant speakers, all three of whom are not just appearing here today, but have variously and importantly made and remade the field of psychosocial thought for across many years together and separately. So I will introduce them each briefly, because I could talk about each of them for a really long time. So Donald Moss, whose book we're celebrating, Dr. Donald Moss is a psychoanalyst who's been in private practice in New York for about 40 years. He was recently the recipient of the Haskell Norman Prize for Excellence in Psychoanalysis, and he is the author of several books, including Hating in the First Person Plural, 13 Ways of Looking at a Man, At War with the Obvious, On Hating, Abhorring, and Wishing to Destroy, and most recently, the book that we're here to talk about, Psychoanalysis in a Plague Year. And the book is really beautiful. Don, do you want to hold it up for a second? It looks like this, and it's available at that link that I just sent. Thank you, Don. Through Routledge directly and everywhere else. We'll also be hearing from Timothy James, or TJ Clark, who's a British art historian and writer who's taught art history at a number of universities, including UC Berkeley. Dr. Clark is one of the most influential art historians and celebrated critics working today, and he is the author of many books, including most recently, The Site of Death, an Experiment in Art Writing, Picasso and Truth, From Cubism to Guernica, Heaven on Earth, Painting and the Life to Come, and most recently, If These Apples Should Fall, Cezanne and the Present, which is available here through this link. And Giuseppe Civitarese is also joining us, who's next to Tim in the Zoom window up top. Giuseppe is a psychiatrist in training and supervising analyst of the Italian Psychoanalytic Society and a member also of the American Psychoanalytic Association. He lives and is in private practice in Pavia, Italy, and is on many editorial boards and is the editor of SPI. He's also the author of so many deeply important psychoanalytic texts and books and edited volumes, including Psychoanalytic Field Theory, a Contemporary Introduction, Playing and Vitality in Psychoanalysis, a short introduction to psychoanalysis with Nino Ferro, an apocryphal dictionary of psychoanalysis, the title I love, beyond and contemporary psychoanalysis. And I'm going to drop the link to all of these books at once here in the chat. You can follow there. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moss to read to us and speak to us from the book before our panelists will have a sort of roundtable conversation, and then we'll all speak together. So please feel free to use the chat at any time to raise questions that we'll return to. And yes, thank you so much for joining. Over to you, Don.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm very grateful to be here and to be associated with Tim and Giuseppe and you and the Psychosocial Foundation and Parapraxis. And thank you to everyone who's come tonight for this launch. Let me just set the stage for the writing of the book. The book, Psychoanalysis in a Plague Year, emerged almost immediately after we fled from New York City to get away from the plague and found a place in the country where we could stay, where we did stay for basically the next year. Doing psychoanalysis is it's a very lonely occupation. And the loneliness is assuaged and mitigated in large part by being in a city. I think it's not an accident that almost all psychoanalytic work takes place in urban environments. When we were banished from the urban environment, the strain on me, and I think on many psychoanalysts who fled urban environments, was intensified. And I could feel it immediately. And I wanted to figure out what might be an effective way to assuage the strain of excessive privatization and interiority. And I think I went about it in two ways. One was to, because we were in the country and there were various indicators of life, non-human life. So one way I tried to assuage my loneliness was to try to imagine a community with those non-human beings. And it was not ineffective. It was actually a source of comfort, like something like the city can be. And another way I did it, or tried to do it, was by writing what I didn't know was going to be a book. I employed a tactic that I had previously done in a different book called I and You. The tactic was to write down verbatim one sentence that each patient of the day had spoken to me. So after the first session of the day, I wrote down a sentence from that session, and the second and the third. And at the end of the day, there would be 8 or 10 sentences, and that would constitute an entity, a unit, and that would be, I would call it day 1, day 2, day 3, throughout the year. My sense of doing this, psychoanalysis is famous. The work of doing psychoanalysis is famously referred to as the work of listening. And to me, listening is profoundly dyadic. I am listening to you. You are listening to me. Perhaps we are listening to each other, might be included also, though that's a little more tentative. I wanted to add to listening, though, and I thought the book helped me, or the structure helped me. I wanted to turn a session into an overhearing. I wanted to add something like overhearing to listening. So it's as though I overheard my patient say this sentence. I overheard my patient say this sentence. And in overhearing, kind of afterward, it momentarily turned the session into a kind of urban event, as though I were on the sidewalk and overheard a remark, and then the next remark and the next remark. So it kind of urbanized the cluster of 10 sessions, let's say, adding this kind of, I don't know how to put it, it might be so idiosyncratic to put it this way, but I'm putting it this way. This kind of adding overhearing to listening as a way of diminishing the loss that COVID was kind of brutally, not kind of, brutally imposing on us. Actually, the kind of simultaneously a sense of loss and gratitude that it was possible at least to flee from what seemed to me and to almost all of us untold dangers. We had no idea how many people were going to die and whether it would have been us. So the sense of threat was always present, and under threat, this effort to constitute a community from whom I was overhearing seemed a temptation I couldn't resist. So I would say that was the, I don't know, it's not exactly a motivation. It was more a kind of, it was too improvisatory to be motivated. I could spot a motive after I started, not before I started. But there it was, a kind of afterwards that made it make sense to me that I was doing this. So another thing I wanted to do, all three of us, Tim and Giuseppe and me, and Hannah as well, have written a lot of things already in our lives. And for me, whatever I have written in the form of declarative sentences that I author, always those sentences, I am suspicious of almost all of those sentences. Every one I write, I might as well add something stronger than a question mark, and something more like, who are you kidding? And this sense of sort of a fundamental skepticism or uncertainty about authorial mastery has been with me always. And one of the things this book does is it kind of, it removes me as author as about as far away as I can get from the authorial, what's the word I want? You know, like the subject's supposed to know, like the authorial master who's supposed to know. It gets me out of it as, and there's a kind of relief in that. It's only what I've overheard. I'm not responsible, you know, something like that. I've just overstated it, but it's some kind of intermediate condition between being author and being overhearer. And I took pleasure and continue to take pleasure in that intermediate position. I don't know if there's more I want to say about the context of the book. Oh, just one more minute about, now it's 18 months later or a year later. And so the book has a different status for me now than it had as it was being formed. And the status now actually is what I would have hoped it to be. It's not, it doesn't feel diaristic, and it doesn't feel like a journal. It really does feel like a kind of record of a time in which people were talking to me, or talking in my presence. And a special time, the COVID time, the plague year. And I take pleasure in the record of it, the recordness of it. But it doesn't feel stenographic. It feels kind of interestingly recorded, but not quite mechanically recorded, because there is an author lurking in choices being made, but you can't quite locate the author, and neither can I, which is a nice mystery. Okay, so let me stop explaining the context of the book, and let me just read. I chose 3 days from which, to read to you, just to give you a sense of what I might be meaning. Let me just do that. I'm just looking at for the days now. These were chosen just a half hour ago, and who knows what led to the choice. I just hope they're interesting. So here's the first day. This is day number 83. Who is this entitled little prick? I will so miss my daughter. Please don't talk to me like that. You say I'm not depressed, just lonely. I display the same kind of cruelty that they did. Where I am in this isn't worth your thought. It's standard stuff, isn't it? My wanting you to like me. I have to see a peaceful endpoint. What you said is worth exploring. If you have any advice on this, I'm all ears. So that's day 83. And now day 150. I reduced myself to the role of extra. I'm trying to think of an actual example for you. Almost escaping is so sad. Death is what's waiting for me. I want to be better at living. I just haven't found the right way. I'm trying to understand idealization. I get pissed off whenever you say that. What if I use the treatment against myself? My wife and I got into an enormous fight again. That's day 150. And now day 171 coming up for your listening pleasure. Day 171. I want to ask you how you are, where you're from. How far can I go without becoming mad? I just don't have the patience for her. I feel sad now, a tightness in my chest. I'm smart, people like me, and I'm reasonably good looking. The lack of touch is unbearable. Rabbits don't even eat carrots. 8 hours of Twitter since yesterday's session. Okay, I'll stop there. And I hope that whets your appetite. And I'll pass the microphone on to Tim.
The baton, you mean? Yeah. So can you hear me? I can't hear myself, but maybe that, oh, good. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much, Don, for the book, and Hannah and Alex for setting this up. It's a tremendous book. And just before I say, just a few things about it, before I forget, I want to just say, Don, that what you said right at the beginning of your remarks just stuck in my mind, and I want to return to that, or you to return to that eventually, which is that psychoanalysis is a very lonely profession, right? It's one, I think you said something, almost the loneliest. And that would be very interesting to me to just know a little more about what you mean by that. but we'll set that to one side and just, I hope, come back to it. I want to say the obvious about this book, which I also say in my foreword, which is that it's very moving. It's full of the sound and feel of human unhappiness. And maybe, of course, that's what you're talking about as loneliness is really also unhappiness that being a psychoanalyst sort of presents you relentlessly with this dimension of being human. And it's there constantly, and sometimes sort of overwhelmingly, really. I was very interested in the fact that you just now said, you know, that this book was a way of coping with the situation. And I thought that one way you actually found of coping with it was not merely to jot down the overheard, but somehow almost from the beginning, and certainly as the whole project got underway, to make something aesthetic out of it. I think I said that to you already, that these days with their varied lengths of line, you know, sometimes quite short, but sometimes almost getting up to the sonnet length. They are verses, right? They're full of prosody. And somehow or other you are perhaps, I'm not sure how aware you were of this, but you were making form out of this, and maybe making form was a way of coping with the situation, making poems out of what you overheard. Yes, I think that's almost enough. I mean, there's another question which is left behind. Well, two things, perhaps. I mean, I talk about this in my brief foreword. I think this really is full of the sound of the analytics session and the quest, the project called psychoanalysis. And it actually comes over to me, you know, as an immensely humane project, and also wonderfully old-fashioned. You know, I mean, wonderfully old-fashioned to be talking about whether or not I have a right to talk to someone else about my unhappiness and its sources. I really don't think that our culture very much wants people to do that. Certainly doesn't provide them, I think, with opportunities to do it. And that's a central poignancy, I think, and point of the book to me. Listen to what people say in an analytic session. You say that you overheard as opposed to listen, but of course, what you overheard was also, in some ways, time and time again, typical of that moment of misery, of self-reflection, of confession, of interaction with another at some kind of deep level. And that's what makes the book so powerful, I think. That's enough.
Hello, do you hear me? It's okay, Donald? Yeah. Okay, fine, thanks. Good evening, at least from Italy's evening. First of all, I want to thank Donald I will read just a few notes that I took this morning because, of course, English is not my native language. So I consider it a honor, a great honor, to have had the opportunity to review the previous book, IAU for the IJP, and now participating to this meeting. I have to say immediately that this new book is just as fascinating as the first. Knowing that those sentences, decontextualized in the way they are, were actually spoken, gives them a special aura, maybe something different from what happens with poetry. Perhaps this has to do with what Freud called the Jung team, our special combination of theory and practice. Moss plays with the chance, he says, overhearing, grounded in accident and serendipity, of what the patient says and the necessity of the choice imposed on him as from outside. I think it is the particular skill of writers to be able to steal fragments of dialogue, for example, from the street. For a small period of time, I myself wrote down some of these fragments. For example, one day in Pavia, in the very center of Pavia, I was on my way to my office and happened to cross paths with 2-3 people. I overheard one say to the others, and that's when all the swans died. The phrase, the sentence, enigmatic, mysterious, dramatic, struck me. There are no swans here around. Made me do a whole series of thoughts and think of situations for which allegorically it could be significant. On another occasion, at the Whitney, this time in New York, 4:24 p.m. on a Saturday in 2019, I heard a visitor shout in Italian on her cell phone. Ma che vuol dire che sei fidanzato? But what does it mean that you are engaged? Or, another example, at the Romania Pavilion at the Venice Art Biennale on November 2, 2019, 11:15 a.m., I hear a woman telling a man in a soft, seductive tone, you know, I like washing machines. So it is important what Moss says in the short foreword, that he embraced his own version of beyond negative, it doesn't mention beyond, but that is what it is, negative capability, quote, to strip myself of purpose and the sentences of context, to take no second step, snippets, a buzz. Personally, I felt really captured by the rhythm that the succession of sentences and compositions generate. Really, you cannot stop. Their music is addictive. It immediately and spontaneously triggered in me a kind of recombinatory game, that is, of selecting various sentences, verses, lines from different compositions, different pages, to weave new stories. This is, I think, the kind of play that these pages invite us to. For example, and I'd say in honor of our common father and the Oedipus complex, from composition 1, what if she slept with this other guy? 2, I pictured their kiss and everything else. It's not my fault that she's alone. I'm not the problem. It's her stubborn southern paranoia. She's only say I'm a monster. You can probably hear the panic in my voice. I was so sad when she left. My thoughts are on the edge of paranoia. I could have slaughtered him. I'm scared of what I would do with weapons. Quarantine is a gift. I don't have any real criminal impulses. So in general, delightful for humor are all the times that also the character Dr. Moss appears on stage. For example, 18, ironic. Dr. Moss assumes the role of a tyrant. 19, direct and I'd say unequivocal. You are such a fucking bulldozer. 22, metapsychological. You are just a bad object. 27, subtly unsettling. You can talk to Moss about that. 85, with you, it's more intellectual than experiential. 85, again, same page. I may want to switch to an OCD specialist. That's fine. Or, of course, another classic, mom. 40, fuck you, mom. 75, I'll take care of mom, don't worry, don't you worry. 76, I fit in with weird loser psychos. And of course, we all may think of Hitchcock, etc. So I happen to think that before starting work every day, an analyst might read one of Moss' texts as if to tune her instrument, or as a kind of prayer, like the opera singer warming up her voice before going on stage. Now, the theme of poetry, which Moss invites us to think about, is relevant to us because poetry is a language similar to that of dreams, a language where the split between abstract thought and emotional body can be recomposed, which opens up creative ambiguity, multiplication of viewpoints, and thus psychic maturity. A mature person is one who is not fanatical, who does not have only one point of view on things. We see well, however, that here we move away from Freud, for whom basically the dream does not create but conceals meaning. What Moss proposes seems to me a happy invention to play with the patient. The game is always within the fiction, it's always a very serious thing, it's always done in two. I appreciated very much what just Donald said about this kind of intermediate space, the fact that he tried as much as possible to renounce authorship. So instead of the you and me just as separate subjects exchanging things, it's, I think, the we that comes to the fore. So the method that Donald proposes is somehow to deconstruct the patient's speech and reconstruct it in a way that the new scans introduced into the discourse create novel and surprising effects of meaning. And I can assure you that it's really exciting, surprising, it's beautiful. You can see that Moss moves away from the attitude of those who think they have an objective perspective on the other, but instead enters into, as I already said, a very creative game. Sometimes the results may be more inspired, sometimes less so, but in my opinion, what matters most is the shift in emotional investment that this technique reveals and promotes. The new sensitivity to the corporeality of words, ultimately to the lived body, involves, in my view, an increase in vitality. Listening to the poetic word, or rendered poetic, opens to multiple perspectives that are emotional activated, even if they are not made explicit then to the patient. Moss proposes something original. I think that there is also a great theoretical and technical value. In the end, he offers us a kind of practical tool similar to another tool that I also, it happened to me to know a couple of years ago. In this case, it's Flavia Genta, a colleague from Switzerland, from Lausanne, that in an article whose title is "The Poetic Moment in Session as a Possible Emergence of the Bionian O," also proposes something different. She says that sometimes she just writes down what the patient is saying, and then she puts many caesuras, slashes, in order somehow to also to force herself to listen in a different way. Both modalities, perhaps we could think of them as new devices in psychoanalysis whose purpose is to make us more sensitive to the manifestations of the dream spectrum. Intrinsic to these forms of expression is the preeminence of sense, which is always multiple, open, vital, over semantic meaning, which tends instead toward closure, stagnation, of ambiguity over logical precision, of the threat of language that Meltzer characterizes as song and dance over abstraction of concept, of the artistic element over the rational. As you saw, even myself, of course, did this before, most poetic texts invite citation. The different layers of content and expression do not let themselves be easily separated. Good poetry does not admit of better criticism than tautology. In other words, repeated reading. And yet, it is never static, because at each new reading, it offers a new, deep, or constructive gain. Transcending this caesura could be the motto of any worthwhile poetic text and any good hour of analysis. I'm going to conclude. In our case, it would consist of asking oneself, who is speaking? Where is the voice coming from? Who is the patient and who is the analyst? Who is making the other speak? What is the inner character that has been given the right to speak? In other words, the language of poetry follows a strategy of wrong-footing, what we call the secondary process. The creative ambiguity which arises from setting the sentences alongside each other induces us to go back to the body of the word. Every time in this circularity, we are given the possibility of restoring the body to the mind, or of reinstating the mind in the body. Of course, as you know, a very Winnicottian effort. It is the essence of aesthetic experience, as Freud explains well in On Transience, a happy experience of mourning, I'd say, the opportunity, when we succeed, of restarting the process which makes us become persons, subjects. I'd stop here. Thank you for your attention.
So wonderful. So now I'll just invite the three of you to speak amongst yourselves, but include Tim already sort of kicked us off with a comment back to Dawn. So perhaps one place we could start would be the loneliness question, or anywhere else you would like to go.
Yes, I think it's a good place to start. That's the problem. It's too good a place, and meaning that to get at it honestly in a certain way is too difficult. That is, it's beyond getting at. That's what makes it so lonely. There's a kind of, to me, it's a little bit, I don't want to dominate this because I think the other two guys here have experiences with the loneliness as well. If I could be so reckless as to assume.
Never.
But I think that there is a demand being made on the analyst to endure his, let me just say his because I'm speaking of me, his loneliness, or endure himself, while the other, that demand is not being made on the other. Only I have to endure something. The other is free to fall apart. And this freedom to fall apart is not something that we in our work are given. And there's, I think one of the things that makes it so lonely is that we're so close to the freedom to fall apart and so profoundly forbidden from falling apart. And it's that proximity to the freedom to fall apart that it's like, well, to follow from Giuseppe's Oedipal, beautiful Oedipal line that he found. What I'm saying might also have an Oedipal component right now. It's as though you overhear the sounds in the bedroom and you cannot participate. But you are almost compulsorily placed next to a very thin wall that does not keep the sounds away from you. So you're hearing the sounds all the time, and you have to stay still and composed. And there's a kind of, I mean, it gets, the strain gets heightened in a context like that. So that's part of what I meant by loneliness. And given COVID and the exile that COVID enforced on us, I think a state of exile, whatever it might be for anyone who's exiled, includes an intensification of whatever vulnerabilities to loneliness one felt before. Now, under exile, those intensities are exponentially magnified. So that's what I would say immediately.
And I ask you a question back, Don. Do you think, because I'm sure that many readers will wonder what difference COVID made, right? What difference the absence, well, that it was all being done on Zoom, what difference that made? Do you think that it's almost as if at certain moments that you suspect, that I suspect, the reader suspects that the patient is, it realizes how lonely you are, that COVID has sort of foregrounded that shared experience. Do you think that was happening? I mean, was that part of it?
It's I think that in a certain way, I think that COVID, in its way, made psychoanalytic work easier for both the patient and for me. That is, the sense that we were in it together, that there was this condition, that we suddenly were co-exiles. And I think it diminished the basically the fantastic, the fantasized hierarchical structure. Moss is sane and I'm falling apart. This kind of I don't know what to call it, binary, was diluted and turned more horizontal by this understanding that we're in it together. Understanding is wrong. It's not an understanding. It's just a kind of brute fact that there was no cruelty in during the year. Actually, there was a sense of I'm not sure this is right, but it's occurring to me now. that when you're on the phone or on Zoom, it's actually harder to be cruel. The physical presence of the other makes it easier to be cruel, I think. And
both parties for
well, I don't know. I'm really
Hmm.
flying by the seat of my pants here. I don't know. It just seems to me that in the presence of the physical other, the temptation to want to physically hurt the other and to then modify that wish to physically hurt the other to become psychically hurt the other is greater in the presence of the other's body. I think that's true. And I think it's probably true in both directions. This is just a guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Giuseppe, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. I was following maybe another thread of thoughts. Well, about the I tell you that before. First of all, I'd like to tell again to people that notwithstanding this book was written in the context of the COVID and of course of therapy, so we know we deal with pain, etc. But how much humor there is also in this book, how funny also it can be, how you can really enjoy it. And I always used to think of humor as the most profound sign of humanity. It's not irony. Irony may be either towards yourself or the other, is always a balance of a victory and of a loss, not humor. Humor, it's us. So it is not us, this intermediate space. So would like to tell the people, some of the people that are listening to us and that did not have the opportunity to read the book, that really you can enjoy it. When I said it is addictive, really. Every sentence is a movie. Every sentence you think of a painting, and you want to go on and go. So one question I'd have for Donald, because I'm very curious to know just a little bit, if he wants to share with us, is relationship with poetry, as a reader of poetry. Huh? How much you maybe were inspired also, maybe, I imagine, from your love for poetry. So I think of your search as a search for authenticity, as Ogden says in the title of one of his beautiful essays, the truth of what is happening, the music of what is happening. Of course, many things could be said more specifically about the COVID and the fact that we were obliged to do therapy, not teleanalysis or Skype analysis. I think that it's still analysis and it's okay, etc. But of course, the presence for us is very meaningful. We lose some channels of communication that I indicate, especially as intercorporeal communication. So we don't have the possibility to use those channels. Smell, tact, the proximal senses, so to say. But maybe this would be another meeting. I prefer to stay on Donald books and his specificity. So Donald, if you want to say something about poetry, you have poetry.
Well, it's the sector of written word about which I have the least interest. I think that's probably, I mean, you may feel surprised by that, but I've given it a shot. You know, our Hannah here, our host, from the time that she was a teenager, was a very serious and generative poet. She has married an even more serious and more generative poet. We are surrounded with the noise of poetry. And I can barely, it's rare for me to feel touched by the poems I read. And I feel this as a deficit of mine. I'm sure and it's a kind of deficit that I've not been able to repair. It doesn't feel like a disability. I like a lot of fiction and a lot of kind of demanding fiction that stretches language in various directions. But there's something I just find with poetry. I find it a little too, oh, it doesn't matter. It's just tough for me. So, and you know, a lot of things are tough for me. So I have to limit the number of tough things I try to do.
So it was really true then, Don. I think I said to you fairly early on that they seemed like each day seemed like verse, like something moving towards a sonnet form, but never quite getting there. A sort of negative sonnet, but you know, as I say, I mean, many sonnets are negative, you know, turning in on themselves and not completing themselves. But yeah, and I think you said to me, well, oh, really? And is that really, I mean, you really didn't think of them as
No, I know they look like poems, and I don't want to spend too much on this, but you know, much of the things I've written over the years, people say, oh, it's so poetic. And really, I could do without that compliment.
right.
I know it's well intended whenever the word is used. It just doesn't.
I could tell you, Donald, what my associations were listening now to you, and they are good associations, I think, because they link you again to our common father. As we know, Freud used to say that he did not have ear for music, but it cannot be because he's such a beautiful writer, so he has to have it. And the second association is always when he says that he avoided reading Nietzsche because it was too close, so he needed some distance.
Yes.
And if you want, a third association was with a movie. Maybe you have seen the beautiful movie by Wim Wenders. I don't know what the title is in English. Maybe The Sky Over Berlin of years ago.
Yes.
There was these angels that
the angels with Bruno Ganz.
could overhear the thoughts of people. Just
Yes.
I think that somehow this has to do with what.
Yes, that's very good. Yes, I like that very much.
It was very, very poetic.
Yes, it's very good. So those angels, I would like to be one of those angels. Yeah.
Good.
There's a nice comment in the chat too, and everyone please feel free to use the chat, which is that the question might also be, from whence does the poetry come that we're encountering? Which is it the poetics of the consulting room? Right, that from where we might receive the prosody, or is it in your selecting? And there's a secondary question, which maybe you can take up. You, of course, continue to feel free to, all three of you speak, but from Alex, which, Alex, can I read it? Or do you want to say it? Yeah, which is a related question, which is when you are excerpting from the sessions. So maybe that's also a question, like, what was the labor? Was it excerpting? Did you feel at pains about what to include? Is the fragmented result itself a reflection of the losses of the COVID period of doing analysis, or conversely, an act of preservation or recording amid the thread of loss? So thinking again, and then there's more, and we can, you know, go on. Alex asks, in this literary register, if you refuse the title of poet, to what extent does poesy have a similar economy to this process of preservation and loss? So maybe from the two questions together, if you're not the poet, what are you? And where might there be the poet or the poets in the consulting room, if not you? If we believe you, which Giuseppe doesn't.
I'm very happy that people like this book. Truly. I mean, at least the people who've said to me anything about the book to me. And I'm happy that I like the book and I like these daily things. And so for me, more than the question of poetry, it would be the question of pleasure. That is, pleasure is being generated by this work. It's being generated by, to me, as I'm doing it, at least afterwards, and then to Giuseppe, to Tim, to Alex. And I don't mean pleasure in this, like in the sense of, it's not a cheap pleasure. It's a deep pleasure. And maybe that's the thing about poetry, that there's a kind of depth to its pleasure power, that can be found in these daily things, and that makes it, in that sense, poetic. Not so much the resemblance in form and all of that, okay, but that's in a certain way a cheap resemblance. But the thing that could make it powerful, I think that's what people mean by poetic. They mean that there's some kind of power lurking that isn't easily explained. I mean, that's the whole point. It isn't easily explained. So if somebody, where's it coming from? Well, the answer is, I don't know. One doesn't know. It's some kind of cluster of words and contexts that point to, I don't know where to point to, probably something that is pre-verbal, that by which we are linked. And it's a funny thing that words, and Tim does this with painting images. Much of, I don't know, Tim, this may be reckless, but I think much of Tim's art criticism, is pointing to the power of images to stir pre-imagistic, the pre-imaginary in people.
Yeah.
And like the same thing with words and analysis, there's a power to stir the non-verbal, and maybe poems do that too.
Yeah.
I
mean, there must have been, so maybe I'll even read one day, but I'll just ask you the question first. All right, you were selecting, or you were not selecting, you were almost not wishing to select, or have happen almost like a free association, right? These were the phrases or the sentences or the that were left over from each session in a day. It fascinates me because in the end, they seem to take on powerful form, and whether that taking on that form was a result of you really not thinking you're making a poem.
Yes.
Right? But on the contrary, just overhearing, right? And just allowing your mind to have one thing left behind each hour. Here's a typical day. Well, it's not a typical day, but it's a very intense day.
Which day?
103. Here, I'll read it, shall I?
Sure.
Yeah. I envy how intensely she lives. No, it's not discipline, it's self-regulation. On what planet do you think I fucking owe you anything? I don't have the right to speak about myself to you. I need you to give me permission to sulk. How do I stop being a jerk to my parents, Don? Please just hear me out. I did all the things a normal human being would do. God, what a terrifying day, actually. I mean, no wonder you felt lonely. But you see, I mean, it is a narrative. It is
Yes.
it is something that takes on a shape. I mean, right? There's a story running through it.
Yes. Well, it seems to me what you're saying is that there's no way for me, or there's no way to vanish, you know, and the residual part of the author is his hand is at work in the story. There's a resistance to chaos and randomnicity.
Yeah.
That
As Jackson Pollock said, I deny the accident. You know, of course,
yeah, there you go.
as
Yeah,
the, you know, I mean, of
Right.
course, he learned that from psychoanalysis, as you know. But
you deny the accident. So here I am, striving for accident and denying the accident. Somewhere, that's maybe what the intermediate space is, where both sentences are true.
Well, I tried before to emphasize also the theoretical and technical value that we can see in Donald's book, and quoted the concept of negative capability that now maybe it's even more appropriate to quote again, because you were trying to describe, Tim and Donald, a special play of passivity and activity, an activity that make it possible for you to be the receiver, that overhearing person that you described. And of course, now we can remember that Bjorn, the one that uses this expression and gives it a very important theoretical place in his thought, took it from a poet, from Keats. So negative. So you see, in the end, we are there. But I wanted also to 2 seconds to read a less threatening, a less dramatic sentence from 91. Talking to you places me at the center of panorama. So it's very peaceful, very calm. And it ends with, I want you to validate what I'm saying. So within this sentence, there is an entire theory of what the therapeutic action is, in my opinion. It's recognition. But recognition, of course, it's a kind of a bond of love. It's not just conscious recognition, which could go very easily. It's much deeper. We cannot control this deeper, profound layer of recognition. Huh? So there are also quiet days.
But remember that even day 91 starts off, it would be easier if my mother were a crackhead.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. But this alternance, this weather that changes so rapidly, it is like when you go walking on mountains. No? You know that the weather can change very rapidly. This is one of the striking, beautiful features, I think, of those texts.
That might be a lovely place to stop for the day in our way of, the analytic hour and 10. has come to a close. There were more questions as well, beautiful questions, which I encourage, folks, if you want to be in touch, to forward them to the foundation. Thank you so much for joining. I want to just say thank you so much to Giuseppe and to Tim and to Dawn for joining this evening. It was so lovely. I could tell that the three of you could now go for a beer and keep talking and debating also poetics, which was a surprise and a lovely one. Here's the book again. And you can again find us and come back for other events, subsequent events, through our website and through the chat as before, next on psychoanalysis in the Chinese diaspora, and then on the clinic. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been really wonderful. Thank you. I'm so happy this event took place. Thank you.
Thank you.